Hello everyone and welcome to the final interview for GamePad Online. My name is Nigel and as you've seen, we've been speaking to different people across the games industry about their journeys into video games, the work they do now, so that people, young and aspiring video games professionals can get insight into what it's like to work in the games industry or around the games industry, as we might find out in a moment. So yeah, my name is Nigel. I'm the co-founder of mayamada, organizer of the GamePad event. And yeah, I'm here joined by freelance games journalist and filmmaker, Alysia Judge. Alysia, welcome to this interview.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
That was very formal. I was trying to be, I was trying to think of an adjective like, this amazing interview. This like welcoming
It's fine.
interview.
What you can do in post is you could just, on that little pause before interview, you can add like some sort of pyrotechnic effect, maybe like a fire pan sizzle, a riser.
You know what the best thing about that is, like your belief in my ability to video edit it. Like that's not going to happen, I can just tell you now, but I appreciate that you think that I can do that. What's going to happen? What's going to happen is I'm going to leave this in because that's the easiest thing to do right now.
Trying to find the clip button in Premiere to let's just put it up as it is. So welcome. We're going to, like I say, get to talking about your career in and around games, maybe some of your filmmaking stuff as well. Before we get into that, letting people know that you can give us your thoughts in the chat, in the live chat, in our Discord. You can also shout at us on social media because that's what people do nowadays. We are at mayamada on Twitter, at mayamada TV on Instagram. And it'd be great to know what people think of the conversations that we're having. I've got like a bit of a kind of context, a bit of background for Alysia so that people know who exactly I'm talking to. So let me try this. So Alysia, let me know if any of this sounds familiar. So you are a games journalist, a video games journalist, filmmaker, like I mentioned. You've worked with Netflix UK, with IGN, BBC, Radio 1, Nintendo, and BAFTA as well. How's it going so far? Yeah.
Sounds familiar?
Yeah.
Okay, we haven't finished. We haven't finished, just checking. So you've also appeared on Channel 4, which I saw that. Al Jazeera and BBC Radio 4 Today program as a video games expert, which I didn't know was a role that you can have. And your written work has been in The Guardian, BBC, again, IGN. This is feeling like UGC kind of thing. I don't know what.
R.I.P. She died.
I know.
With a controller in her hand.
But she lived with a good life. And you've also been part of the MCV Future 100 list, which I'm going to ask exactly what that means in a bit. So did I cover everything?
You've done your research. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So before we get started, the important question is, how's your painting and decorating going? How's that?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So I moved into a new place at Christmas and it's been 6 months here and I still have a lot of painting to do, but I've painted a lovely diagonal line down my flat. Yeah.
I saw that. So I encourage people to look at the Instagram post that Alysia sent me, because you sent me the before and after, and it's amazing how much difference a diagonal line of paint can make to a space.
Right?
I was quite impressed.
Seriously, The Sims did not prepare us for this. And I think my reluctance to finish painting the rest of my flat has something to do with The Sims. It's so easy to like undo something.
Yeah, I know, right?
You don't put it.
You don't have to think that hard when you can just just go back.
Yeah, and you don't get all the, in The Sims, you take paint off the wall and you get money for it. There's no refunding paint once you've painted it on your wall.
That is a shame, but yeah, good to know it is going, because I was impressed by that. Don't know how much effort it took, but I was impressed. The picture looked good.
Thank you.
Let's talk video games, because I think that's what we're here. Talk video games. So let me ask. So I just rattled off a bunch of stuff that you do. So you work for different outlets in different kind of areas. What I'm always interested to know is, where did you start? Did you start doing all these things, or was there one in particular? How did you make your start?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, My very first start happened because I was working in a bar at university, and one night a colleague came in and he was like, round of Jaeger bombs for everyone. I'm quitting my job at the bar. I've got my dream job as a staff writer at Official PlayStation magazine. And I was like, his name was Phil Evanuik. And I was studying English Lit at the time and working on my student paper and like considering about, the idea of video games journalism. And I had absolutely no idea that I could combine my love of gaming with my love of video games. So that was kind of the moment that I realized that. So I asked him for some work experience. And so that was like my first break. Official PlayStation magazine were really generous. They let me go on the podcast. I was the first work experience student ever to do so. So it was like a lot of introductions, not just to writing, but also to podcasting and kind of the wider video games journalism world.
So you were doing, you said English Lit. Was that with the intention to write for video games or just write? And then you got this opportunity through kind of randomly, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was really random and really lucky. I mean, honestly, like when I chose English literature, it was because I was looking for something that I was good at, that was quite broad, that I could apply to different fields. I hadn't decided exactly what I wanted to do. I loved video games, but I think, I went to university in 2010 and certainly at my school, like even though all my friends played video games, like no one told us that video games was a viable career. And I think that has changed. It's amazing how much has changed in 10 years. But I've now gone back to my school and done careers talks on games, which is really nice because no one did that for us. So it's nice to be able to give that back.
Cool. No, nice. So you were a long-time game enthusiast. What was your earliest gaming memory or gaming console?
Definitely PlayStation 1. I mean, no, before that I do have memories of the SNES and my dad playing it, but my favorite early memory is PlayStation 1, Tomb Raider, my dad and me playing it. I say I was playing it. I was 4 or 5, so I was kind of hanging out next to him, go there, shoot
commanding,
the bus. It's very dictatorial for you.
Be better. Why can't you be better, Dad?
Stop dying, Dad.
There's tears and everything. It's just I can see it now.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, when I graduated university in 2013, there actually at the time wasn't a lot of jobs going in games media, and I faced the problem that I think a lot of people have when they graduate of going, I want to write about video games. How do I get in? There's a lot of shut doors. I don't know where to start. And so I kind of sidestepped and I went into technology writing, and I wrote for this little site called IT Pro Portal. And from that name, I know you're dying to know more. You're give me
tell
the
me.
details.
Yeah, I mean, we're here, right? You may as well.
It's a B2B technology site, and my reasoning was that if I could write about technology, you can write about the insides of the PlayStation 4 and CPUs and GPUs and and it was actually amazing. Do you know what? It sounds like such a dull gig, but I traveled around the world with them. I went to Taipei and Korea and America. Okay. I did tours of Silicon Valley and stuff.
You should have led with that.
It was really fun. And it taught me the basics of SEO and all of these important lessons that you need to know writing for online, how to structure an article and then that was kind of my first break into writing.
Wow.
And then from that I ended up working for Pocket Gamer and sorry, this is such a whistle-stop tour, but
cool.
Pocket Gamer, a mobile gaming website. And then I was interviewing the creator of Candy Crush. He's a guy called Tommy Pong. And at the end of the interview, he was like, I've really enjoyed chatting to you. Have you ever considered doing video? I think you'd be really good. Which you're oh yeah, all right. Yeah. Whatever. But he's no, I've got this games program in Sweden and we need someone to run the YouTube channel. Would you move out there for a summer in a month's time? And I was like, you do realize I've never held a camera before? And he was like, that's okay. I like you. My fiance's running the program with me. So I was like, great, cool. That's good to know.
Yeah.
And then, I just moved out to Sweden and filmed these game developers who were living in the woods making video games and kind of told their story over the course of the summer. And it was this sort of self-taught crash course in editing, camera ops, which gave me the experience in the show reel to eventually apply to IGN when a job came up. And then that's how I ended up working in video production at IGN.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, I didn't get that in my intro. That's good to know.
No.
Missed that bit out. Nice.
It's a bit of a weird self-indulgent thing. I always find it really weird, doing the whole whistle-stop tour of how you get there. But I do think it's interesting if you ever chart someone's route into the industry, because everyone's is completely different, and there is always a bit of luck in there. It was the luck that I worked at a bar with a guy who worked in gaming, and there was luck that I happened to do that interview with Tommy, because if I hadn't have done that interview with Tommy, I actually don't know whether I would have. I probably would at some point have gone into video, but was so good doing it then and there, and it led me to IGN, and IGN is when I really learned my video production craft. So so many opportunities came from there. So
if anyone's listened to an interview done before, I'll probably brought this up again, and I will continue to, because it always makes me laugh a little when people say luck, because I don't necessarily believe it, or not that I don't believe in luck. You can get those coincidence that help you out, but if you look back, it's you've done something. So it's not you've just sat and this opportunity has come. You've been in a situation you knew you wanted to write, so you did the thing you were where you needed to be for that. You need video games, so you kind of taking opportunities, and you were maybe. And I felt sometimes you don't feel prepared in the moment, but it's some form of preparation to take that opportunity. I think that's important, alongside with what you just said about sort of your whistle-stop tour, to see that that's kind of what it's about. It's taking those opportunities, because not no one, but, from the outside, people might see people in the industry and just say they were just dropped into that position. But as you just demonstrated, you weren't. You're just taking opportunities and being prepared.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely way to put it. I think definitely someone once said that people don't have career ladders anymore. They have lily pads, career lily pads. And I think that's a really nice way to put it. Of definitely felt at the time when I took that job at IT Pro Pulse. I mean, it was for no money. It was 13 grand a year in London, which is barely anything. So I really was pretty poor at the time, but it had all these advantages of still traveling around the world and learning my craft, and so many ways it was not what I wanted to do, but it's so rare to go into your dream job straight out the gates. Some people do it, don't get me wrong. My colleague at IGN, Rory Powers, I think that was his first job straight out of university. So it's not to say that it doesn't happen, and
for sure.
It totally can, but it's rare, and actually have a vision of where you want to go, and then just sort of make side steps. It's a turn-based strategy, you just think a few steps ahead and then try and position yourself in a good spot for the next move.
Yeah, I like that. There's some good analogies, the lily pad analogy. I like the turn-based strategy. I'm gonna steal all these analogies and use them to my own. So because you had gone to university with a view of, you say, you had a vision of roughly what you wanted to do, and then you had this opportunity for video games. In terms of parents or family, what was the reaction, if any, in terms of I now want to work in video games? Was there support there? Did you have to do some convincing? I know that does happen with people.
Yeah, I was really lucky, I think, to have really supportive parents. I think that, my dad had played games with me growing up, so he was really interested in them. My mum, politely baffled, but, proud that I made a decision of what I wanted to do. So, I mean, and I was lucky as well. My friends from school, one of them has become a game developer. I definitely It's funny, like, I remember I talked about this at a Women in Games conference once, but like, I didn't even realize that it was unusual to be a woman in games, as in like, you know, a woman pursuing a career in games, until I was like at university. And, you know, when you meet people for the first time and like people were putting my name in their phone, is it, you always forget people's names.
Yeah.
So you always like, or like, I was like, oh, Alysia Gamer Girl, or just Gamer Girl in some people's phones. And I found it really weird because I was like, that's a hobby of mine, but it's not my defining characteristic. Like, I just found it really strange at the time. But I was used to being defined as tall. You know, I'm 6 foot, so you know that was fine. Okay. But like, it was like this really interesting moment of going, oh, okay, like it's never been a thing to raise eyebrows at before. So I think I have been really lucky in my life to have friends and family that are just really accepting.
We're gonna talk a bit more about like sort of media and things, but I want to touch on it for now, where it's interesting to me. Like, I like asking people who work in media, whether it's like, you know, PR, advertising, or journalism, because I feel like we're in such a weird space in terms of getting information out to a public that is maybe more knowledgeable than it's ever been, more skeptical than it's ever been, and even more, I don't know, just like quick to react than we've ever been. So I'm always interested, like, how do you do your job in a world where people think they know more than you? I guess that's my question. I know if you can sum that up, because you write for, you know, whatever publication it might be, and it's it's part of opinion, it's part of things that you would have researched and you would have talked to sort of first-hand people, but then you put something out and you might get dismissed because no, you're wrong because whatever reason is so reason here. How do you manage that?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, I guess the question's twofold, because, you know, you can ask, like, how does that impact your work, and then how does that impact you mentally?
Even better response. Oh, I like where we're going with this.
Yeah, because I guess that's like, how do you? I mean, the answer for like how do you deal with it in your work? I mean, the reality is that anyone who's a storyteller, I always think of storytelling as a service-based job. You are there to serve the audience, whether that's through entertaining them, equipping them with knowledge. Like, it's not about you. It's not about your ego. So if someone comes up to you and they're like, no, you're wrong, you know, I think it always comes down to who are they? If a game developer comes to me and says, you are wrong about this particular thing, I would be far more inclined to listen and be like, okay, like, fair. Like, it is really important to be open to criticism and feedback. But if it's, you know, a member of the public who, and gaming is a wonderful industry because it's got so many engaged, really, really passionate fans. But sometimes people are super fans and they take it to an extreme. And yeah, like if someone, I don't know, like I wrote a piece for The Guardian maybe like 6 months ago, looking at basically it was like looking at wealth in games, and there's been a bunch of research on Yuki about the industry makeup, basically, like what are the backgrounds, cultures, contexts of who are making our games in Britain. And unsurprisingly, the games industry, it skews white and male, but also quite surprisingly, it skews really rich, more so than film and TV. Like, people who work in video games are more likely to come from upper middle class backgrounds than, say, like a film director, which is really interesting. So I wrote this article and this guy messaged me on Instagram and was like, thing that he really took umbrage with was the line that I put in the article about the intersection of race and wealth, and about how, obviously, if we're looking at the games industry being mostly wealthy, we also have to look at how that intersects with makeup of UK, and how if you are from a poorer area of London that happens to be less white, that means that you might end up less likely working in games because you've not the money or the funds to be playing games. And yeah, so we kind of just ended up going in this round and round circle where he was like, I don't see how they're related. And there were these stats to back it up. And then I was also like, this is really weird because we are ultimately two white people arguing about race. Like, go do the research, like listen to some black creators talk about their journey into games and how it was just,
it's one of
it was
those
all
things
very messy.
I find if it doesn't necessarily impact you, sometimes it's hard to see how it can impact others, which is not a good excuse, I don't think it's, but that's kind of what I've seen, particularly over the past year, where if something doesn't impact people, they're like, oh, well, for me, it's fine. So I can't see why it's a problem for someone else. And it sounds like that might be, I guess, in that particular case, where it's like, oh, I don't see how it can affect, because it didn't affect that person, which is not a good way to. It's not a good way to look at.
Yeah, totally. And it's messy, and it's just So I guess, like, the best advice I ever got given when I was at IGN, the managing editor there, Daniel Cooper, said, everyone always says don't read the comments, but he was like, but genuinely don't even read the good ones. He was like, the ones who are like, oh, give us another one of this, like, give us this series, oh, we want another video like this. Because he was just like, when was the last time you commented on a YouTube video or like an article? And like, that's a good question, like, for you, Nigel. Like, when was the last time you ever commented on anything?
Of my own free will. Not that I can remember, because sometimes if a friend has a video or someone I know, but it's not necessarily something I would do. Like, I wouldn't necessarily put a comment. That's just me. I like just asking if you want to know what I think. But I wouldn't do it.
And I think I'm exactly the same. Like, and don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that you're a weirdo if you comment on stuff at all by any means. Like, it's a totally valid thing to do. But actually, the majority of people don't comment. You might drop a like on a YouTube video that you really like. That's probably like the most interaction you'll do.
Yeah.
But even then, like, a lot of people, they'll just watch the video, and if you like it, you'll reach the end of it. If you like the article, you'll reach the end of the article.
I do want to ask you if there is either a piece of advice that you've been given, in addition to what you just said, which is really good, but for someone who is, say, just starting out and wants to do something similar to what you're doing now, what advice would you give to that young and aspiring game professional?
Well, what I'm doing now specifically is I'm very much focused on video production. So I would say the best thing that you can do is start teaching yourself the basics of video editing, because especially if you want to be a filmmaker, obviously there are so many different avenues you can go down. Like, you can learn camera work or DOP and set design. There's so much. It can all be quite expensive routes, and if you want to direct or you want to produce, it will always be valuable for you to know how to edit, because that's the building blocks of a story. If you don't know how to edit and you're directing something, it's so helpful to direct with an editor's eye, because you can be editing it in your head and then feeding that in as you go. So even if you yourself I don't even really want to be an editor, but I really want to make videos on the internet about video games, or I'd love to make a video game documentary, or whatever, learn how to edit, even if you don't do that for a living, because it will help you in whatever.
All right. So you spoke about, when it comes to doing your job in a world where people think they know your job, there's the professional side of it, but then there's the mental health side of it. And I think particularly for the year and a half that it has been, people are much more aware of the mental side of things. And even like you touched on something earlier, how what other people think matters. And to a certain point, it shouldn't, but it does. And I think at some level, everyone cares what someone else thinks. So when you're doing your job, and your job is to put your opinions and thoughts out, and then you're getting those reactions, how do you deal with that mental health side of things when you're getting some negative responses or things like that?
It's a really good question. I'm really lucky in the times that I have had really negative responses to something. I can kind of count my fingers. Like, I've not had horrific waves of abuse that I know that some people do get. But It's really tough. I think it's really tough as well when you already, I have anxiety like a lot of people, and, it definitely does trigger it to put something out online. It is always vulnerable to publish something.
Yeah. Can I just like echo that and say, because I've started doing like videos, and we're not getting like a large amount of views at the moment, but I remember putting things out, and then you get like a notification on YouTube that someone's notified, and I just feel inside, whoa, did someone hate what I did? I don't know why my mind would instantly go to that. It wasn't. It was just someone giving kind of feedback, but my mind is, whoa, is this it? Did someone hate what I did so much that they're leaving that comment on the page? And I feel, I don't know, maybe that's just me, but kind of not quite like trained to maybe think like that a little bit now.
Yeah, completely. And it's something I was even talking about this over the weekend. It was Cheltenham Science Festival, and I did a panel with Shay Thompson and Shella Ramanan and Corey, who's this writer at Silver Rain. And it was this wonderful panel about like the power of gaming, and it was so much fun, like really rich discussion about like games and justice, and like there's a game being made about the Windrush generation that Shella and Corey were working on, and like it was all really, really cool, rich discussions. And afterwards we came off stage, and we were talking, and we were all like, oh, did we pitch that right? Because it was a mix of gamers and non-gamers in the audience, and we were all kind of like, oh, like, did it work? And then a couple of people came up to us and were like, oh, we're non-gamers, but we love that. Now we really, really want to play video games. And like, I know they were so excited and passionate, and it was really, really lovely. But we were reflecting on it afterwards, and we were like, oh, it's such a shame that we didn't know that we'd done a good job until people told us that we did a good job.
Yeah.
And I find that across, I don't know, you might find this in your work as well, but
a bit too closely, actually. yeah.
And isn't it bad? Like that it's definitely something that I want to work on more, of sitting more securely in my work, of going like, no, I'm really happy that I did a good job. Because also the reality is that, and as you said, like, especially in gaming, people are really opinionated, and they do think they know a lot, and it is really rare to please absolutely everyone. So if you can sit and go, no, I know I wrote a good piece, or if it did have this limitation, it was because of X, there was a good reason for it. Like, that criticism will wash over you more, rather than like digging and sitting under your heart. And
yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it's that balance between being open to criticism and learning, and not automatically thinking you're the best, but still being confident in the work that you're doing. It's a fine balance. Yeah, I totally feel what I've had that sort of fairly recently, where I'm just doing something and sort of getting like really good feedback, and the person like asking like, I'm paraphrasing, but I had to do a drop for a radio show about GamePad. So I put something together, I did an edit and everything, sent it across, and I wasn't sure. Like, I don't know if this is good or not. Feedback came back like really positive, and he asked me like, when you did this, did you know it was that good? I was like, genuinely no. Like, I could have imagined you saying like, this is terrible, do it again, just as well as I could have imagined you saying like, this is good. And that's not a good thing.
It's so annoying, isn't it? It's how our brains work. It's like, God, help a brother out.
Yeah, like, exactly. Like, so, if someone's watching and they can help with that, you've got contact details, like, get in touch.
But do you know what? I think it's a byproduct of a lot of our industry being self-taught, like, if we were taught more how to do certain things, or there was feedback kind of built into our jobs, I just think we'd have be encouraged more to self-reflect and have the tools to know whether we are good at what we're doing. As it is, we don't have that feedback, and a lot of the time we are sort of teaching ourselves as we go, and the only feedback we get is from an audience, and so we become really reliant upon it and dependent, so, or a client, because like in that case, like that radio drop, that sounds it was a client, so like,
it was actually a mentor of mine, so I shouldn't have been necessarily expected any kind of negative So I mean, he would have told me if it wasn't, because he's definitely told me like if it didn't need work. But yeah, so he would have told me. But so it was a friendly kind of interaction. But yeah, still, I was like, I have no idea.
We're just primed for sort of the fear of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I wish that I had, some really sage advice of how you deal with the mental health of dealing with online opinions. But I mean, aside from what I was saying before about trust the analytics, I think that's the best bit of advice I can give. And then on the mental health side of things, it's kind of just learning to trust your own voice. And that is something that I'm still learning to do at the moment. So, whatever path that looks like for you, trying to follow it and sit more securely in yourself.
Yeah. No, I think that's good advice and a good thing to raise for people watching, whether it's media or something else. That's good advice to keep in mind. One of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you is obviously you're doing great work, but when I asked you, or I was telling you about what we do, and I mentioned the games industry, and I mentioned you being in the games industry, and you said, and we can check because you're here, you tell me what you said, but you said you don't work in the games industry, you work in games media, and those are separate things. I had lumped them together, so I'm interested to know, why are they separate, and what's the difference between them? Because you write about games, so doesn't that make you part of the games industry?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think, honestly, there's a lot of people who are in games media who would, say that they are part of the games industry. And that's also valid. I'm not going to, pull away from that. I just think, me personally, I think they should be separate. It's sort of in the same way that if you were a political journalist, you wouldn't call yourself a politician. You are someone reporting upon something. You are not involved in the actual creation of games. If industry, by definition, has always, from the Industrial Revolution, it's always meant the act of creation, and then all of the politics that go with that and the complications of that. Media should always sit slightly outside that, because the job of media is to be impartial and to look in and to report. And media will have its own politics that shape it, and its own sort of, a lot of the things that shape the games industry will also shape games media. Don't get me wrong, two are inextricably connected. But I just think it's important to have that step back, because as soon as games journalists think that they have sense of, not ownership, that's the wrong word, but I guess it's how I've always struggled with the game that games journalists and influencers do it too, but it's less of an issue because you're an influencer, but games journalists will be sent merch from games when they come out, and we'd always be sent cakes. And they'd have the name on them, and then the whole idea is that you're meant to take a picture of a cake and share it and be like, oh, this is lovely, I've got this cake. Or wasn't there was a game last year that it came in ice? Was it Destiny? There was some game that came in ice. Ghost of Tsushima. They sent out really gorgeous sake that they sent to loads of games journalists, and everyone was sharing them on Twitter and social media, which is because of course you do, because you're this is a gorgeous box of sake, and it's amazing. That is absolutely why they're sending it to you, so that you can flood people's Twitter feeds with images of Ghost of Tsushima. And this is what I mean about games industry and games media going somewhere. That's where games industry and games media have suddenly connected. That the games industry has gone oh, come in and you are now part of the marketing machine. You're part of the machinery of this games launch, because now you're promoting it. It's but gaming shouldn't be part of the games industry. It shouldn't be part of that promotional tool. So games media shouldn't be part of. It should sit separate and should be treated as such. I say that obviously because I didn't play that game, and I didn't enjoy doing those posts. So when I was sent stuff, I wouldn't post about it. I stopped getting. I was going to say, so did you stop getting stuff? Did you stop getting opportunities? Of course, because it's part of the game. I didn't build as strong relationships with PRs, because PRs are obviously sending you that stuff to get stuff back, you know, and so PRs learned off, we sent Alysia stuff. So you know.
By the way, if anyone, you know, you can send that stuff to me. I will. If anything you are going to send to Alysia, just cross her name out and put mine in and send that to
just
me.
like we'll do like a Royal Mail redirect.
Yes, return. I'll take that stuff.
And hey, like, I really want to make clear, like, if anyone's watching who wants to get into PR, or like, you know, it's all really valid, and I totally get the hustle. And like, if I worked in PR, it's totally a thing that I would do. It makes so much sense, and that's why, like, for influencers, I don't think it's a problem at all. I think that, like, it's a great thing for influencers to do and share, because that is literally the role of being an influencer. It's to be you're part of a conversation, and you're generating conversation, and conversation and marketing go hand in hand. But video games journalism is different. It should be a lot more
objective.
Outside in and objective.
Yeah, it's hard to do that when you're like, here's the cake, this it. Now let me tell you about the game. I get that.
Yeah.
I think,
and it's tricky. You know, there are totally big crossovers, and like, I can so understand why it would be weird to separate the two.
I see what you're saying. It's a tough one. I feel a lot of it is because of just where we are, and I guess maybe it's one of those things that does need some kind of reset, because we've spoken about, you know, as you're talking, I think of Cyberpunk, and we've spoken about it on the podcast. We spoke about the last GamePad, and we don't need to get into the whole thing about that, but I think it is such an important moment in games, because I think it will change certain things, and hopefully change things for the better, or just make people think going forward, because it felt like there was such a tight relationship there, that because what you don't want is the avoidance of like criticism for the consumer, the buyer, the person who's going to make the purchasing decision and is relying on games media to inform them. And I think we had a situation where people were misinformed about what they were getting. And I mean, I don't know all the gory details, but part of it was like, surely that's the media's role to say, here's what you might want to think about. It's not to say like, oh, this game's terrible and blah, 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 or this game's great. You just say, here's what you should be thinking about. I feel that step was missed for that game until it couldn't be hidden any longer.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with games like that, you know, is I definitely saw it at the BBC when I was producing a gaming show for Radio 1, and like, was an episode that we were doing with a really, really big publisher. The episode was all about their game that was coming out, and they're such a powerful game maker, like one of the most powerful. And we did an interview with them, and there had been a news story at the time about practices in their studio, which we asked as we were up there, and the person we were interviewing answered the question fairly. They gave a fairly boring answer. We actually weren't going to use it in the show, but we were like, cool, great, answer the question. The PR was there in the room, they didn't stop it. And then when we got back and we were editing the show for iPlayer, the PR emailed was like, if you use that footage, like with that question, we will blacklist the BBC and we'll never work with you again.
Oh wow, blacklist the BBC.
Like they were literally, and it was really aggressive, and it was great because, you know, Stefan Powell, who is obviously a presenter on the show and he produces the show as well, he was just like, you know, he's been a journalist at the BBC for like 8 years and backed up by rigorous BBC editorial standards, and he was like, no, absolutely not, like, you not talk to us like that, like we are impartial, and like, fine, if you don't want to work with us again, who cares, like, you know. And was very, I think we did end up including it in the episode, but you know, we had a conversation between us of like, if we were a smaller games media specific outlet and that publisher had come to us and said, we will never work with you again, you know,
could you afford to do that?
Media, could we afford to? We probably couldn't, you know, and I think that's the reality of something like Cyberpunk. It was one of the most hyped games, and it comes from a publisher that has such power, you know. CD Projekt Red is like, it's a games industry staple. It's created some of the most iconic franchises that are now creating franchises in and of themselves on Netflix. You know, it's so powerful. If they turn around and say, you're not allowed to show any footage from our game except the footage that we give you, it's very hard for a lot of games media to push back. I'm not saying that it's right. Like, I think it's really wrong, but I do see it from the point of view of games media. It shouldn't be that way at all. And in the ideal world, if all games media gather together and we're like, well, fine, we just won't cover your game at all, that's great, because then that means that like CD Projekt Red are forced to change. But try and get a global industry of different publications to all do that at the same time. I mean, it's not.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, okay, it is
messy, isn't it?
It is, but so I see what you're saying about the sort of need for distinction and separation as much as you can. But yeah, it is a tough one. So I guess, well, kind of along similar lines, we've had, by the time people are watching this E3, we've still got Summer Games Fest. And I guess on maybe the more sort of positive end is, where do you see, because we've had a lot of disruption, obviously, with like pandemic, and it's forced industries to change. It's forced, sections within industries to change. And we're seeing changes with the sort of rise of the Summer Games Fest, the turbulence with E3. Like, where do you see that going forward? Like, what do you see the relationship between these showpiece events and sort of games media?
I don't think that the relationship will change that much, in terms of the actual content that's pulled from it, because ultimately these events live and die on game announcements, and games industry press need game announcements to drive traffic, and games developers need games industry press to report on their games announcements. So it's, the relationship itself will still stand fairly unchanged. The manner in which it happens of live events versus in-person big shenanigans at E3 is a different thing. I love E3. It is so much fun to go out there, and like, it is so, I think because gaming is it takes place in our living rooms or in transient spaces, like, your Switch on the London Underground or whatever. But it's always quite private, and I think that's why conventions, whether as games press or just a gamer, are so powerful. Like, why do you go to Comic-Con, like, with your friends? It's because it's so powerful to be in a space with all of these other people playing, when actually, normally you'd be disembodied online playing with all these people. To actually occupy a physical space is really powerful. So I think for that reason, I'm like, I love E3, and I would be sad if it remained virtual, because there is something so nice about having a tangible games industry that you can see and touch and feel, rather than one that exists purely online.
I agree.
But,
and I've not been to E3. I wanted to go, but
maybe one day you'll be able to. I hope that you will.
Yeah. So one day I hope I can make that journey. Well, that is a journey to be made, and then I can make that journey.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Like, we'll see. I just think when PlayStation pulled out of E3, that did fundamentally change things. E3 was always defined by the PlayStation and Xbox stands being next to each other, and there are so many stock images of like the two facing up against each other in this corridor, and like like that really changed things when they pulled out. So we'll see.
Okay, we'll see. Before we end this interview, I was keen to touch on some other topics in what I will call a medium fire round.
Medium fire.
So as I was putting together these notes, I came across a profile of yours that mentioned, and I believe this is a quote, that you specialize in video games, entertainment, film technology, cultural analysis. Is that cultural analysis? This is what it said. And
so intrigued to know what this quote was, but yeah.
Women in tech and education. So before we wrap, just want to ask you we've spoken about video games, but different questions on some of the other topics. And partly for my own amusement, but also just to show that for anyone who's looking to work in video games, to have some awareness of everything else that's going around. Because as you've shown through this interview, you didn't necessarily start with video games. You came from a different route, and there are other things going on that will impact video games. There are things that video games will impact. So yeah, I think it's important. But like I said, also for my own entertainment. So which trend today will have the biggest impact over the next decade? So we're looking at, AI, self-driving cars, 3D printing. What do you think is going to have the biggest impact?
Oh, that is such a good question. You know what? It's not necessarily like a technology, but I'm really interested in, this is so dumb, data protection laws. I'm really...
Did not see that. So when I put... when I put these together, I did leave that off the suggested list, data protection. And can I just say, I did not prepare Alysia for these questions, and I was not prepared for the answers. So tell us why.
So I think you'll find that the data protection laws of the country are.
It's really interesting because if you watch The Great Hack on like Netflix, or like there's so many interesting articles out there that look at how actually like our data is a human right. And like in the last week, there's been this news story of the government are once again trying to sell our medical data. They're going to the NHS, and I don't know if you got an email from your GP. I got one from mine looking at how like terms and conditions are changing, and it's all so that they can essentially sell our data to different companies. So your whole medical history will be up for grabs, but anonymized, so they'll take your name off of it. And it's kind of like gone under the radar because obviously there's lots happening with COVID, and the government tried to push it through a few months ago, and failed because not a few months ago, a few years ago, because obviously there's like huge ethics surrounding it. But it's kind of like stuff like that of, it's really easy to not take that kind of stuff seriously because it doesn't have edges to it. It sounds really like, and I certainly don't, it took a documentary like The Great Hack for me to kind of see it for what it was and really go, oh, actually, no, that is really bad that people have access to that kind of thing. And like, what do people own about me? And I think in the next 10 years, we will definitely have a greater steer on that. And I think people will probably care a lot more about it. And, the work that campaigners are doing now will bear fruit in 10 years' time. And we might look back and go, that is totally mad that we didn't know that was happening at the time. But cool, now we do.
I will give that to you. I'll give you that. I think, we're in a space now where we don't realize how important it is. And we've kind of just progressed forward with technology with the model of our data is for sale by these companies without necessarily stopping to think, what does that mean what does that mean now? But at such a big scale, what does that mean going forward? I agree. I think there'll be a point where we're going to have to hold on a minute. Because if you just, and we could do a whole kind of episode on this, but if you think about, say, Google, it is free because, they're selling your data. How would everything change if you controlled your data and you had, you can have it, and it was there was a cost to the companies, everything changes, whole business models, whole industries change. So I'll give you.
Because it's yours and you own it. It's such a good point. So you can willingly choose to sell it, but at the moment, someone is taking what is yours and selling it for you. That is totally mad. In any other circumstance, we'd be like, "What the hell?"
It doesn't
because it's invisible. We don't notice. You don't miss what you never had. So because we're not even aware that we have it. We're not sad that it's being sold, but it has such impact and consequence.
Yep. Okay. I like it. You are proving this bio.
Good. I'm glad that it's gone into the vault.
It's cool. And you kind of answered the cultural analysis part as well, because I think that will also have a big impact on the culture and where we. Last thing is, where can people find you?
Oh yeah, I'm on Twitter at Alysia Judge, ALYSIA, and Instagram at Miss Judge Shots. The majority of work that I'm doing at the moment is on Netflix UK's YouTube channel because Netflix loves geeks. Yay! So I am, posting videos on there.
Cool. It's good. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Like I said, we could have done multiple episodes on multiple different threads, but thank you for taking the time to give us, your perspective, your experience and advice.
Thank you, Nigel. Like I said, I think you're such a badass for doing this. So thank you so much for inviting me on.
Cool. No, I appreciate it. So, for everyone watching later on YouTube, let us know what you think. in the comments if you want.
We say hi.
Yeah, I know. Give us all that things, or you can send us an email. Our emails are more private if you're one of those the silent majority that likes to give their thoughts. GamePad@mayamada.com. Don't forget to follow us on Twitch, on YouTube, where we'll have future GamePad events, and we'll be putting interviews up on YouTube after the events. And if you like the sound of my voice and think, I can hear just a little bit more of that, we also do a podcast, Story X Story. Alysia has been on, so I will put the link to the episode that she was on in the description, so you can check that out. And that's myself, co-host Tazzy. We discuss stories across pop culture, including video games. And check that out too. So this has been our interview. I've been Nigel, speaking to Alysia, and we will see you all another time. Hey there, I'm Nigel from mayamada. Thanks for watching our video. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the other great videos we have on the channel. You can also join the GamePad Discord and check out the next event at gamepad.events. We'll see you soon.